Hello and welcome to another episode of Business and Bubble Tea.
Here on the podcast with us today, we have Graziana Maellaro. Graziana is the founder and managing partner at Vōx Communication.
Graziana, could you tell us a little bit about Vox Communication and its mission?
Thank you for inviting me. And Vōx is a communication agency that was born in China in 2016. And as a mission, we wanted, first of all, to give coherence to brands, because we noticed that there was a little gap between the identity and the heritage of brands from Europe, from US, and what was communicated in China, how the brand was presented in China. So I can sum up saying that Vōx mission is consistency and is giving brand a good voice. Even if I prefer to say that we give a voice to good ideas, not only brands, but good ideas in general.
And how does that, I guess, brand identity change when you make that cross from, shall I say, west to east?
Oh, that's quite a huge jump, I would say. They really
I'm sure.
Because the identity of the brand itself, as we consider in luxury management, the brand must stay the same. So you need at the same time people that understand who is the brand and who was the brand, what's the heritage and the culture before coming to China. But at the same time, you need a part of the team that is able to transform it for the Chinese consumers and the Asian mindset that is fully different. I would say that the change is quite disruptive, and for sure it's a good practice for every brand, because the way they can transform themselves in China, they do not even imagine at the beginning of the journey.
So what is the key to make this transformation successful in China? And how would this differ from a strategy that you would implement for the European market, for example?
So in Europe, I would say that the European market is slower, and you have time to adjust the strategy. Chinese market is pretty fast, and sometimes you need to anticipate a lot of things. So the real difference between Europe and China is that the path of work for the team is totally different. And sometimes it's very difficult to explain this to European company. And the second difference is the power of purchase. Normally, the luxury consumer in China is pretty young, 20, 25 years old. They can already afford very expensive and luxury things. And this changed totally the purchasing behavior and the way you need to present that product.
And a lot of communications, I guess, marketing agencies talk about this notion of building a community when it comes to reaching out with your brands. Is that different with regards to this sort of different community that or group that you're speaking to, this new demographic? Is there a different way of reaching that community in China?
There are different ways. First of all, we need to change our European mindset to say China, because you discover that China is actually many Chinas, I would say, because we have
many Chinas.
Yeah, we have many different area, many different kind of consumer. Even in the same age, people can be very different from north to south, from east to west of China, and this is quite challenging. But also, when you consider the Chinese consumer itself, you need to keep in mind that they do not have that same perception of that brand heritage. I would make an example. Fendi was, for me, a luxury brand, but a brand that is very classic somehow, recalling the Roman tradition.
Yeah.
In China, they didn't know all this, so they did present Fendi during an event of pop culture. So in a disco with some hip hop singer, and
Yep.
it was fantastic. It was totally different from the Fendi I had in mind in the beginning. So what works in China is the law of few. You have to choose niche consumers and a few groups and start with them and try to acquire a strong positioning in small groups.
And does this, I guess, change in, I wouldn't necessarily say brand identity totally. It was really interesting you mentioned the point about North and South and how, I guess, China's sort of broken up into different communities within itself.
Yes.
Does that branding change dramatically when it goes to sort of Fendi targeting South versus North? What differences are quite obvious?
The identity of the brand will not change dramatically from North to South. So you need to choose a consistent way of communicating the brand that is valid for all China and is respecting the global communication. But what changed dramatically from North to South is the merchandising selection. An example is the Bulgari black ring. It is quite popular in north of China and in Dongbei area because the young consumers, young men, they love to wear the black ring, the black Bulgari ring with gold, and black and gold is something that Chinese young consumer they don't like in South, for example. So in this in Bulgari merchandising selection, you see this difference from north to south, and this happens in many brands. You can have a very good example also in furnitures. The selection of furniture you have for north of China is totally different from South China. South China normally is quite minimal and design oriented. In the north of China is much more baroque, I would say.
And I guess
that's super interesting.
Yeah,
Sorry,
and I guess apart from all these differences, there are also some like common values across all China.
Yes.
And I was thinking, for example, some luxury brands like Dolce & Gabbana who made some big mistakes in China. What do you think what do you think are the biggest mistakes a company make when entering the Chinese market and like to stay in the Chinese market, for example?
First of all, I have to say that D&G is the case. We know that it was quite huge, but many companies, they do mistakes in China. It's almost impossible to do not mistakes in China. Of course, you need to have a good team of risk management in China. That's normal. In the case of D&G, I think that they wanted to propose a communication strategy that was okay for Italy, but it didn't work for China. And the communication strategy wanted to recall the Sicilian tradition in a moment in which in Italy they wanted to recall and recap all these memories about ancient places and about old traditions. But in that moment in China was everything about new, and they still were in the moment that they wanted to emancipate themselves from what is old. So they didn't accept at all the communication. And I don't want to go in particular into the spots, also because as Italian, I felt really sorry about that.
Yeah.
And as a South Italian, I felt double sorry for that.
Oh gosh. Well, I guess bearing the mistakes in mind, what do you advise in the way of what to go on as a company thinking about getting out to China and how you address the Chinese market? What indicators can you use to mitigate this risk that that Dolce & Gabbana, I guess, maybe didn't anticipate so much?
The communication team must be a mixed communication team. You need to use the melting pot into the communication team because you cannot use two separated teams, one in Europe, one in China, that communicate once per month. I think the communication between the two teams must be daily communication and with the same level of importance. So if a Chinese says something, suggests something, must be as strong as if a European. Another suggestion I would give is that when you think about a communication, you don't have to think as what is cool in the country of origin. You have always to go in China and see what is cool in China in that moment. For example, a nice feeling that the Chinese love to have is in advertising is the power of cuteness.
The power of cuteness.
Normally, if you talk to luxury brands in Europe, what they want to express is coolness. That is sometimes totally different from cuteness, right?
Yep.
Makes sense.
But cuteness works a lot. You can see the collaboration between Gucci and Doraemon, the animation cartoon. That Chinese were basically amazed about that. And I think that was a collaboration that was a very, very Asian collaboration and very well studied for the Chinese market because they came out from their European style and they totally adapted to the context in China.
And considering these trends in China, and also you mentioned before, like earlier, about how fast is the Chinese market in terms of changing. What future trends do you see in the luxury industry in China specifically?
I see avatars.
Okay.
Avatars, I hope.
Yes, actually, I have to say at the Hong Kong Digital Week that just closed on November 6th, there were presented some meta-humans that are going to be part of advertising and communication campaigns, and they are going to become influencers, artists, and they are going to be connected to fashion and NFT. And I think this is the biggest trend we have to follow, and we need to understand. It's very difficult for the most part of companies, brands today to they understand what is NFT or what is a meta-humans, but how can we use these things? It's like we have magic tools, but that we still do not know how to adapt, how to use in a real way to make our work better, to make the brand more interesting, to make products closer to the consumers.
And we know your motto is 十年鼠目, 百年熟人. Can you translate it for us and explain why is it important for you? Why is that motto for you?
十年鼠目 means 10 years to grow a tree. Banyan Shuran means 100 years to grow a human being, a person. I think I try to remember this in everything I do in my work, because people are always at the center of my work. When I think a strategy, I have to think about my team. How can I teach to my team or share with my team knowledge about European brands, and make sure that we are all on the same page in order to respect the identity of the team. But then when we go to put at the center the person as the consumer, they teach to me about how the consumer thinks. So 100 years to grow a human being means that you try to understand, and you keep in mind that the most important things are the values you are able to transmit, to transfer, to share with human beings. These values, they will become culture, and they will become the society mindset. So as a communication company, we have a huge power. And I try to remember this as a founder of a company, but at the same time as a teacher, because I also teach digital marketing. So I like to think to my students in 100 years, in 300 years. And I think in every company, you need to think in 100 years. If we are able to change the human beings and to share these values, then of course we will grow also in 10 years, we will grow trees.
So that's fantastic. And just bearing in mind those this motto that you have and this idea of communicating values, we've got time for one final question. I just wanted to ask, what's, I guess, one lesson you've learned as a founder on your own entrepreneurial journey, bearing this sort of motto in mind?
I would say that in China, what I did learn is to be as flexible as possible. As an entrepreneur, sometimes you always try to avoid risk, to prepare a business plan, to know what you're going to do in the next 5 years. It's good to have some guidelines, but you also have to transform yourself, and also being flexible to enjoy the journey. Do not worry too much.
Absolutely.
The best advice I can give to an entrepreneur is, especially in China, is control your fears, enjoy the journey, and also check the wind. How is the wind? Sometimes you need to
that's an interesting
follow this wind.
Check the wind and control your fears. It almost sounds like the start to a Batman film.
Yeah.
We will keep this in mind.
Well, Grace, that's all we've got time for today, but thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, and thanks for inviting me. It was too fun.
Thank you so much, Grace.